So some thoughts that I just wanted to get down have to do with the notion of the inner child and inner childhood, and how when we're interacting with someone, we're interacting with them, who they are, the inner adult, the inner adulthood, the inner child, and the inner childhood. And the only reason why these roles exist is because of the developmental stages that we go through cognitively. However, all of these things are all mapped into the same system. We consider them to be distinct phases because that's how we experience them. And so then the integration of the psyche, the integration of the somatic experience, all of these different things, we learn to integrate them. We learn to, and from the integration, we become our personality. Something to consider is that like someone might be in a position where they're like, oh, I recognize your inner child, but I don't recognize your inner childhood. And that can be dissociative. Or I recognize your inner adult, but I don't recognize your inner adulthood. And what the inner child is how I would describe it is, it's like it is what is the core nature of yourself at early stages in life. But the inner childhood is what happened to the core nature of the self during those early stages in life. And similarly, inner adulthood is a little bit. This is why it's like they're very incomplete terms. Is the inner adult is the core nature of kind of coming into our present state and kind of has a lot more expectation, but the inner adulthood is the transposition of the identities of the adults around the inner child. And what I see with that is I see that as we become like a supposed adult, we encounter the mythical nature, the ethereal nature of our memories of the adults around us as we were growing up. And so there's being an adult and then there's adulthood. And the two processes are informing each other cognitively, as well as the inner child and inner childhood are also informing each other cognitively. And if any one of these factions of conscious states of identity and experience if space isn't being held for them, then it's going to cause not a schism, it can get to that point of separation, but it's going to cause alienation within the psyche and within the relationship. And so this is like I use these four roles they're arbitrary, but they are stages of development. Like that's the only thing that kind of makes them relevant. But they're labels, because a whole human with a whole integrated psyche is neither their inner child or inner childhood, their inner adult or inner adulthood. They are just a compendium of fluid states of knowing. And when if we're not holding space for it, for any one of these aspects, then it causes other aspects to be even more further pronounced. And then when we're interacting with those aspects, because we may have alienated a certain state, those other aspects become become more pronounced. Maybe I just said that. But what can be really challenging is that regardless of how we might be holding space or presencing or in a state of energy transmission with someone, if we have those parts of ourselves adversarially or aversely delineated, then that becomes the space that we hold for others as well. And so it's kind of the part of ourselves that we cut off in others. And so all of these things are going back and forth, really ricocheting in our relationships. And the real challenge is that we may have learned certain mechanisms or patterns, responses, reactions, or even created our own, but still as a learned process from our environment. We may have learned certain ways to behave with the inner child or with the inner adult that that don't translate or translate very poorly to others. And so then as we've learned something, we then begin projecting it into our environment. And with the hippocampus, it's as basically a predictive model for the rest of the brain, for the rest of our cognition, and the people and things around us to behave a certain way. And so as we've learned relationships, that's how we are in relationships. And of course there can be experiences that will kind of maybe create more integration for us within this. However, so often, so many of the experiences that we have are a series of reactions or suppressions, basically trying to fit a model, even if the model is to break out and to break free and all these different things. It's still a very routine. It's very routine and will show up in a relationship in such a way as to create kind of a confusion, because it's this compulsion towards action to navigate a reality based on perception. And that perception may not have been accurate or may have been accurate in the past, but it is not accurate in the present. And really the degree to which we can integrate ourselves, we can see that not necessarily this is in no way to be without accountability or acknowledgement of what happens in our daily activities. So it's not to it's not to like exonerate people or to like remove accountability. As I see it, that would not be beneficial. But to be able to have these aspects of ourselves so well integrated that we are effectively holding space for ourselves and others at whatever level of cognitive development so that we aren't taking on a role that then forces the composite or polarized or dualistic or opposite role to form. And for most people, in order to kind of like, oh, this is what I saw people do when they needed to regain control of their emotions growing up. This is what I do when I try and regulate my emotions. This is what I did then. This is what I do now. This is what I learned from what I did and how it didn't work. And all these different things. Well, all of that emotional availability and emotional unavailability, even mental, physical, uh, psychic, or spiritual, all of those things are still reagents. They're still reactions that are trying to find homeostasis. And of course we can find flow. Like that's absolutely a part of the gift of being the gift of being alive. But when we move to a role for our survival and then we are re-experiencing that role, we're actually projecting the elements that were previously threats back into our environment and onto the people, energies, and places around us that may not actually exist or may not be what we think that they are. And so we're basically recreating the pattern. Like, this is a big way of saying that we're recreating a pattern. And oftentimes we're recreating a pattern where, oh, this space was or wasn't being held. And or it was being held under XYZ conditions, and so then I have to create these conditions in order to hold this space. So I have to recreate these conditions in order to have the environment internally and externally to hold space, internally and externally, for all these different things to happen in such a way that I might feel in control or some other manner of thing. And if space, all of these things are represented in memory, experience, and knowledge, and they're all aspects of our cognitive function, but the real nature of it is that they're also aspects of navigation of thought, navigation of feeling, navigation of others, navigation of ourself. And so what happens when, rather than so this is going to be a little bit it's not going to be inaccurate, but there are instances in navigation of waters in the ocean that might not apply to this metaphor or analogy. But rather than trying to navigate the ocean by the size of the waves, it's like returning to the actual map, returning to the actual instruments that are seeing the bigger picture and allowing the information from those instruments to inform the process. And a part of it, I mean, it can get kind of dicey because it's like, well, yeah, I'm just like paying attention to how I feel in my energies. And so that's me going back to the instrument. And in a lot of that may not be so. Um, there may be something even larger that is a constellation of how we navigate. And what it is it's not necessarily even the stars. It's the compass. I forget the thing that people look at to get the angle. It's like this cylinder that you look through that has uh 0 to 90 degrees labeled, and so it measures the arc that you're looking at in the sky, the angle of the arc that you're looking at in the sky. And so it's not even the stars, it's not the characteristic of the stars. Those are just a moment in space, a moment in time, and a moment in energy. So it's those three components in terms of a cognitive state of awareness that are more relevant than the ocean and more relevant than the stars. And they are the tools that are enabling the act of navigation through sense and perception, through sense, perception, knowledge, insight, action, all those things, identity, personality. And so if those things are, if we keep going back to uh, a characterization of archetype and a characterization of feeling, and those things were constellations in our psyche from our childhood, from the thing that was around us in in our child years, our childhood, just like a neighborhood. The thing that is around us, the thing that is around our home is our neighborhood. And so in our childhood, it's the thing that is around us. If those things were maybe a little bit errant in their own navigation and a little bit errant in their own constellation, then even if we destroy those things, our mind still has the state of consciousness that was in the perceiving of them and effectively in the creating of them as they were in the creating of us. And it's not actually the true state of space or the true state of presence or the true state of energy. And really, even as close as we can get to the nature of those things, if we don't have that in concourse, or as I experience it and as I work with it and teach people about it, if we don't do that together, then our nervous system, even if we do gather hold of better ways of doing things, our nervous system is still going to recreate our relationships based on that. And this is every person's nervous system to every other person is going to be this way. And so we can kind of find those things that's like, oh, well, it makes us, we're most compatible, or there's this chemistry between us, or there's this energy between us. And these kinds of things can always be wonderful aspects of how we find health and security in ourselves and in our relationships. But really, the thing is um, it's really a lot simpler than that, and it's simply knowing how to navigate. Like, if you know how to drive safely on one road, you know how to drive safely on all roads. Or rather, if you know how to drive safely, it would incorporate many, 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 many different conditions. And it would be to hold space for the car in front of you, to hold space for the car behind you, to hold space for what's beside you, these kinds of things. And so all of a sudden, everything becomes more navigable. And even to the point where it's like, you don't have to emphasize your boundaries. Like, it's clear enough. It's obvious. And that's where people get so like resentful even in expressing their boundaries, which can cause a bilayer of reactivity that is emotionally and energetically charged, which will actually magnetize exactly the thing that the boundary is to keep out, will be not magnetized to it, um, because of those emotional charges. But that, like, the boundary of the car is obvious. It's the car. Like, yeah, don't run into it. That would be great. Don't have an accident. That would be great. Um, so that's the boundary. It doesn't need to be stated. It's obvious enough. However, if you're in your vehicle and I'm considering, if one is in their vehicle and they're considering themselves to be the only person on the road and they're driving as such, that is going to be impeding to a lot of other people and the boundary conditions that they have, i.e., their own vehicle, the safety of their own vehicle. And so what you end up with is you end up with people that are not holding space, but wanting space held for them, or holding others in their space as an act of control. Because if I can hold you in my space, then I don't have to respect your boundaries because I'm in control. And if I don't have to respect your boundaries, then I don't have to hold space for you. If I don't have to hold space for you, I don't have to respect your boundaries, I don't have to do all these different things, then that just makes it a lot easier. It's an easier coefficient to work with. I don't know exactly how I describe it in mathematics, like as like a part of a function. But if I can control that variable, then I don't have to worry about it creating any miscalculations. Well, but that's another vehicle. And to control that variable of another vehicle, it is going to have its own responses. And so you'll have people like, well, I'm not going to hold space for you. And oh my gosh, I don't like how you're reacting to me not holding space for you. Well, not only am I not going to hold space for you, which I was already not doing, but now, or like, not only am I, yeah, I'm not going to hold space, I'm not going to hold space for you, and I wasn't holding space for you, but then now I need distance from the space that I'm not holding for you. And so it's just like, it's literally compounding the, I don't know, psychological ramifications of poor navigation. And yeah, so I don't know. I'm just trying to like get a lot of different thoughts out in this, but so that's me looking at kind of the intermodality of holding space. As simple as it might sound, that it translates into our maturity, our immaturity, our integrity, our disintegrity, our healing, our treatment of ourselves and others, all of these things. Our own nervous system, other people's nervous systems, all of these things. And it's not just as sensitivity, because you can be as sensitive as you'd like, but if you aren't realizing the navigation of things and how, like, if I'm super sensitive to you and I'm not holding space for you, then I'm always going to be chafing on your aura. And I'm always going to be in situations where like there's just going to be chafing between us. And then the real rub is, well, when I'm not around you, I'm not chafing on your aura, so it must be you. And it's like, no, it's not. It's both of us. That's always the case. No matter how super fluid someone becomes, if they are not in the act of sentience, of holding space, they are effectively seeking to get themselves into as deep of friction as possible with others while not taking accountability for their own elemental nature. And I don't bring that up to like bring up like talking about the different elements or something. Like this isn't I don't I don't really subscribe to alchemy in that way. But but the yeah, if someone's not holding space and yet they're kind of coming into these states of contact with others and then reacting to and putting boundaries up in other people's space, then they're uh, it, it's a form of tyranny, effectively. I mean, there's amendments in the Bill of Rights about this kind of thing, like no warrantless seizure, and like the right to privacy and these kinds of things. And of course, like what's so funny is it's like there are people that have been in my life where it's like uh they have uh like distanced themselves from me and claimed their privacy as though that was ever the issue. And when I say people, I mean like very, 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 very few. But very, very intense interactions and relationships where it's like, oh, privacy was never the issue. It was that you weren't ever holding space for me. And you feel what is it? The blowback, the recoil of the fact that you weren't holding space. And now you need your privacy in order to protect yourself from, from yourself, but to protect yourself from a perceived threat, which, if you're doing the perceiving, then the perceived threat is yourself. And a lot of times people will be like, well, I perceive no threat, to the point that it's a type of ignorance, which again creates another polarity. And space resolves all polarities. Space resolves all dualities. Like that is like the fundamental nature of space. So there is no light or dark in space, but there is all light and all darkness in space. And so, does that make sense? That should really make sense. It's not a paradox at all. It is absolutely not a paradox. Um, but yeah, so in space, uh, all of these things are resolved, but people will um, not honor the nature of space itself, and in so not honoring it, cause a disruption as to the dishonoring that, like, kind of like what is it, like mutating a contagion of not holding space for others, or holding space only under certain conditions. And this isn't to say that boundaries aren't important, or that space isn't important, or having distance from certain things, certain people, whatever, that these things aren't important, but that they in themselves can become acts of abuse just as they were done as acts of abuse in our childhood years, as we may have witnessed between parents or family members or just within the society, and so it gets trained into us. Those acts of abuse are remembered and recreated and then get repeated. And so the only way to unrepeat them is to experience the nature of space, but not just the nature of, oh, this is like, here's this spaciousness inside of me. I'm going to chase after the spaciousness inside of me and avoid the contraction or these kinds of things inside of me. Well, if you're chasing the space inside of you, then it may very well be that everyone around you, as you haven't balanced the duality within, everyone around you feels the contradiction of that and experiences the contradiction of that. And then when people have had enough of that contradiction and call you out, and using the royal you, but when one calls out another party in this way, then that party finally feels what they were doing all along and the misunderstanding of it all. And it becomes this it becomes this, smorgasbord of chaos. And because the party was avoiding non-spaciousness in the first place, or the kind of the notion of non-spaciousness, it isn't actually, space does not, space can feel tight, space can feel constrained, but that is not space itself. Because space is in all things at all times. So people will go for the idea of the thought of spaciousness, but not be holding space for contraction, not be holding space for the other stuff, and even describing it in these terms is it's almost completely arbitrary. There are much better ways to describe it, but that kind of gets off topic. But the in not holding space for all of these different things, they're pushing it outside of themselves. The outside finally will push back, and then in the pushing back, the person is not liking the experience of it, not liking the experience internally or externally, or in this way, or in that way, or all these different ways. And so it's just continually recreating and basically creating an exponential, like a runaway feedback loop of negativity. This is, I guess, what people might regard as like spiraling. But really what it comes down to is it's like, well, if I hold space for spiraling, that will not be so. Or rather, it will find its proper resolution. But if I don't hold space for myself, or I don't hold space for others, or if I hold space only under certain conditions, then I'm going to be recreating the conditions. I'm going to be recreating those conditions and experiencing the recreation of those conditions by myself and the people around me, which is tough because then I'm causing others to behave in a way that is unbecoming and controlling, when that need not be the case. But that's the trip, though, is that it's like all of us have to drive safe in order to be safe on the roads. That's just how that needs to be. So all of us need to be learning to navigate in these ways. But when we get into navigating the vehicle of the body with the idea of the personality inside of the body, or and even if you get really ethereal with it and into like the spiritual realms of things, there's still a body, there's still a being. And it needs to be understood as such, as something, a vehicle being navigated, or that's doing the navigating while being the navigator. And so these principles stand regardless of culture, regardless of belief, regardless of anything. If one is, I mean, even single-celled organisms have to have a form of navigation. And so all living organisms navigate. I don't know if I can necessarily say that the stars navigate themselves, but they certainly are on a track that is being led through space and energy and time. And this isn't to get into an Einsteinian idea of time, or what's the arrow of time, or what's like all this other, it's not random bullshit, but it's not necessarily relevant to the discussion because it's a lot simpler, it's a lot more experiential, and it's a lot easier to incorporate into the daily motifs of our experience in a way that is both meaningful and enriching. And so, yeah. Oh man, I think I kind of lost my point. Well, regardless, da, 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 da. Yeah. Well, it's about the navigation. It's about navigation in relationships. And so if people are going to be very poorly navigating, or if one is driving really erratically to the point of causing or inducing rage in someone else, and then they're like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? Like, oh my, and it's like, you like induced by resonance rage, and then you're like, I guess the easiest provocation, and then you're wondering why it's showing up in your life, and that itself could be a memory of a state from childhood, or parents in childhood, or how nervous systems were regulating and dysregulating, and how like homeostatic pressure was being formed in relationships growing up. And so then even if one is trying to develop their own individual psyche, all of these weather systems, all of these patterns, all of these landscapes are still there. And it's not necessarily even that they need to change, it's the process of navigating the information itself. That's the only important thing. And if one is not utilizing the principles in navigation correctly, then it is going to disrupt in a very dangerous, and a very cruel, and in a very in a very it's going to be disruptive, and it doesn't need to be that way. And the funny enough, holding space for disruption is every part of how disruption can be properly worked with. Holding space for hearing things you don't want to hear is actually really important. Holding space for it all is actually really important. Again, because space is through all things, so it would make sense that if we have a cognitive ability of that we use it, and that we use it to the best of our ability. So yeah, I didn't really button anything up in the most fashionable way, but that kind of I don't know, it gives a lot of context to ideas that we need to be able to incorporate in our relate in that sentient beings need to incorporate in their relating to other sentient beings. And I apologize that it's, I focus primarily on holding space, but presence and energy transmission are also very relevant. And uh, and in some ways, maybe not. But I just figure it would be important to kind of enter this into the tome of human knowledge, because I haven't ever heard someone speak about these things in the way that I am trying to understand them. And it's not to say that there are not incredibly proficient, brilliant, super brilliant people that are already applying these principles, and probably even deeper and more amazingly than I can even speak about it. But that we should all be so capable is the point. And that it's, if you have somebody that you can sit with for 20 minutes in silence, then you too will be a perfect angel in the matter of probably about a week. If you could do it every day for a week, 20 minutes, your life would change. Your life will change. Of course, there's, go to the gym and eat healthy and all that fun stuff too, but in terms of your ability to perceive things, and it's almost bland, and it's almost in a way that's detached, except for you can be 100% engaged. You don't have to be detached in order to hold space. And in a way, we oftentimes we think we need to detach because we are not holding space. And so we weren't actually ever attached in the first place, or rather, we may have only been attached because we were not holding space for the other unit of consciousness that was with us. And so, yeah, I don't know, it's fun because it's like everything that I'm talking about can go like five or six different directions in a discussion. And I can't necessarily, like, I could follow the different directions that it could go, but I think I think what I've shared already is plenty. Thank you for listening, and I hope that this was at least sparked some intrigue and insight and inspiration into what your process is and where you might be in your process. And it doesn't need to be overly complex, and I'll probably release information or I'll probably create content about that. About, I mean, it's so basic what holding space is. When you hold space for someone, you're holding their space for them. Not even necessarily holding them in their space. You're holding their space for them. And their space might be expanding, it might be contracting, it might be this, it might be that, but you're holding their space for them. And when someone's holding space for you, that should probably be the golden rule that they're holding space for you by. And then there's both holding space for each other, there's holding your own space, then there's holding someone in your space, being held in someone else's space, and then combining all of those things together. That's like the primary exercises for that category of cognitive function, which primarily includes the hippocampus as a perceptual basis. The rest of the body and the brain and everything have their own ways of perceiving these things. In fact, each organ has a different way of holding space. But the hippocampus is kind of like the interface between the conscious and subconscious mind, and so it can help with integrating that information from all the different spaces inside of our being and outside of our being. So that is my definition of holding space. Maybe I should have opened up with that. But yeah, it's holding your space for you and not holding it against you either, which is another clever little tactic. Oh, I'm holding your space for you, and I'm also holding it against you. Oh shit. So, yeah, have fun with some of those thoughts.